Today, we're going to be talking about what happens when physical and cybersecurity meet. I wonder if that's sort of like a Reese's peanut butter cup. My co-host, Lisa Bradley, Katie Noble, Crob, and I are joined today by Jay Angus. Jay is a 16-year veteran of the cybersecurity industry and someone that knows a thing or two about industrial control systems and medical device security. Welcome to the show, Jay.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
Absolutely. So who wants to start it off with a question?
I have lots of questions.
Yeah.
So many questions.
Mm-hmm.
So this is actually an incredibly topical topic. Since we've had, I think, a very recent documented case of this intersection of physical and cybersecurity. So, Jay, maybe you can kind of help lay some groundwork for us all. And maybe what are some of the differences between physical security and cyber security?
So I like to always start with the CIA triad. That's the easiest place to start when we're trying to find a difference between physical security or maybe operational technology and IT technology. IT technology, its primary focus is probably maintaining confidentiality, maintaining the integrity, and having that availability there. You know, who's okay with the email server going down for a little bit? It's not a happy time, but it's okay. The mail's queuing out there. It's not the end of times. On the other
mail
side,
searching gets.
Right. On the other side, with operational technology, OT, industrial control systems, availability is pretty important. If you take one of those operational technologies out of the loop for even a second, you could potentially have a life safety issue immediately. You move on to then the integrity of the system, and then the confidentiality. Almost everyone, when it comes to industrial control systems, no one cares. Because no one cares when the historian, which is a common piece of operational technology architecture, is recording a valve opening and closing thousands of times a day. We're not really concerned about the confidentiality around that information. But we want to make sure that valve, when it's supposed to close, and we tell it to close, does it every single time. We don't want any second guesses there. Does that kind of paint a picture?
One of my old coworkers, pretty brilliant, has a pacemaker and hacked right into it. I think that's scary, but it was sort of cool that he did it. Although it's not cool that he could do it, right?
Well, right. And one of my favorite embarrassing stories, being a coordinator of vulnerability disclosure, was I had a researcher that came to me and said, "Hey, I'm doing some medical device research." And I was like, "Awesome, tell me all about it. I want to make this public information and improve the security around it." And this researcher is going into detail about the device. I'm like, "Man, I'm getting really amped up. This is really cool research you're doing." And she's like, "Well, and the primary reason I decided to start doing this research is because the device is implanted in me." And then I was like, it took me back for a second to maybe I shouldn't be so excited.
So excited, right? Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. I'm excited he did it, but it's a little scary.
Oh wow, yeah, that's very scary. So I mean, and these are devices that are going to be put in place. A medical device is similar to an industrial control device. They're put in place for 5 to 10 years. They're not put in place with a 3-year life cycle like maybe a server or a laptop might have.
It's an interesting comment, Jay. The fact that a lot of your specialty with the physical world is there are very definite physical safety and livelihood concerns, whereas in cyber, which is what the rest of us live, is that there may be, but normally it's information disclosure or some kind of tampering. That's a little bit. Does that raise the stakes a bit, eh?
Just a little bit, sure. And even when you get into the medical devices, you start talking about confidentiality. you start having to deal with HIPAA laws in the U.S. And there can be fines associated with disclosure of HIPAA information. So you're not just suffering from an outage, potentially. You could be suffering from the loss of, PII information. That could be very, very sensitive to an individual.
Yeah, I can imagine an outage of a pacemaker or a pharmacy pump would be fairly severe.
Wasn't there like some new rules though in California to try to make the IoT type of technologies more safe? Is that words or something?
I'm not entirely familiar with the IoT devices because they're all junk. A lot of times, they have a lot of questionable controls that can be put in place around those devices, and I think California did try to institute a law that said you got to have at least a complex password, a longer password. But
Password.
That's yes.
You mean you
that's
can't
what
use password as your password?
What was it a few years ago? Windows was more secure without a password than it was once you gave it a password, I think.
But do they have those same kind of rules on things like, health monitor, like things, or is it just up to the company to do it?
It's generally dependent on the company, and I will admit they've gotten much better with the controls that they're putting in place. The problem is these are very expensive devices. Hospitals they may be expensive to go to, but they're not making lots of money so that they can replace MRI or imaging devices just overnight because they need more complex passwords. I think they need a better reason to replace an MRI than 8-character passwords.
Go ahead, Crob. I know you've been trying to ask something.
I was going to say, from your perspective, what makes an ICS system? Is there any kind of special characteristics of it that sets it apart from like a distributed or mainframe technology?
What does ICS stand for? I'm sorry. We always throw around acronyms.
Sure. Industrial Control Systems.
Okay, thanks.
Which is operational technology, OT versus IT. And imagine it like whiskey versus bourbon, right? Or scotch, right? No, Jay. Like, okay, so all scotch is whiskey, but not all whiskey is scotch, right? So like all industrial control systems are operational technology, but not.
Yes.
There we go. Yep. See.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Thank you. See, education.
Technology
We have
not
education
IT.
here.
No.
Right.
And
But all ICS is operational technology, right?
Yes.
All ICS is OT, but not all OT is ICS.
So would you say that ICS systems are like built for purpose, unlike the more generic distributed system?
When I think of an ICS system, I generally think that it is managing a physical process.
Okay.
It is automating some kind of manufacturing process, the control of an electrical system. I mean, any sector, any of the 16 critical infrastructure sectors, you can find an industrial control system in there in some shape or fashion.
Yeah, your home computing system's not going to be an ICS system, highly likely. You're talking about the systems that you see in manufacturing facilities or in mass transit, like train operation facilities, or water plants, chemical plants, those kinds of things. Those are going to be industrial control systems versus like your at-home or your Fitbit, which would be an IoT device. So there is a difference between IoT and ICS. So,
are there classes of ICS systems?
It depends on your perspective and I guess the context of the conversation. I would say the Purdue model is a great way to classify where systems reside.
For those listening, what is the Purdue model?
Yeah.
They make chicken.
So,
one of my best friends' last name is Purdue. I don't know. That's what I was thinking of. Like your mind goes where it goes. You thought chicken, I thought a friend. She was also the governor here. So yeah. Sorry, Jay.
So there's the Purdue Enterprise Reference Architecture. For this model, kind of in the ICS realm, there's like 5 levels, and the first 2 levels, probably everyone on this call is super familiar with, like our enterprise network. For level 5, level 4 is going to be like our email, intranet, those type of systems, and then we kind of descend further into the depths of hell. And we hit our industrial DMZ, and we start seeing maybe devices that don't look quite as familiar to a typical enterprise environment. And then we get to level 3, and this is definitely where we're seeing industrial devices. We're having these factory applications, engineering workstations. Then we have like the clients of all of those devices at level 2, down to level 1, where we have maybe like what we think of as a PLC, a programmable logic controller that's more directly interfacing with a physical process. And then at the lowest level, and some people say the most sensitive level, is level 0. These are the sensors. This is where we're going from an electrical pulse, or I think of from an electrical engineer perspective, you're going from an analog signal to a digital signal. So, and there's actually been examples from long before Stuxnet of that level 0 being manipulated just for the fun of it, so that the commute home could be a little bit quicker. That manipulation happening at level 0 is like the most difficult to detect. You literally have to do like a heuristic, traffic analysis over time to detect this kind of manipulation.
And I think we're all grateful that Gypsy Dancer was analog, not digital, so therefore the kaiju couldn't interfere with it.
I have no clue what you just said. I don't know what that means.
I also have absolutely no idea.
Okay, good. Okay,
it's a movie.
Like,
yeah, talk about
we understand, and I'm like, no, I really don't know what you just meant.
So we're talking
about going there. You can tell me later. Okay.
So we're talking about like safety systems, right? Like we're talking about like the logic controllers that control the power grid, right? And that kind of stuff. And like the PLC, like I always think of, when I think about PLCs, I think about like the power grid, and I think about controlling the flow of like electricity. And if you were to cause damage to that or kick it offline, the real world impacts of that are like pretty catastrophic, right? Or think about like the fires in California last year that were started via that like power grid overheat. So like that's a cyber physical attack, or not cyber physical impact rather, not attack. So like we used to think in this world of like cyber, like all of the policymakers and, like your mom and everybody else, like I know everybody's mom. I just go with everyone's mom, right?
Yep. Always. Yep.
Used to think that like, oh, well, cyber, if something bad happens in the cyber on the line, then, oh no, your Netflix is down. How sad for you. You can't use your MyFace account, right? And so it's kind of like this nuisance sort of attitude. But now, like with the level of like integration that we see in things, we're talking about very realistic stuff. And we're talking about actual real world impacts, like things like I said, not to say that like the fires last year were started by a cyber attack, just saying that like if something were to happen that would cause those generators running the power grid to overheat, that could cause a spark, which could cause like a fire, right? Or like we think about like the vaccine, right? We're all COVID, we're all vaccine, right? Well, those vaccines are being stored right now because we have millions of like millions of samples of vaccines, right, being stored in cold storage. And if something were to happen that impacted the equipment that's storing and keeping that climate controlled, right, that could cause those vaccine samples to become unusable. So
Let's give the bad guys some ideas, but you're right.
The idea is like we're demonstrating that like cyber is not just the world of your MyFace account is no longer working and sad for you. You got to go outside and play. You got to talk to your neighbor, like nobody talks to anybody anymore. But like we're talking about like the impacts of things being controlled via cyber means that have physical impacts in the real world. So like Jay, I think you had talked about and brought up like traffic lights. Can you talk to us a little bit about like your thoughts on the traffic light situation? You brought up that example.
Are you anti-traffic light?
That's a different conversation there.
No, I guess the question is like maybe I'm just not up onto my media, and all that. Have we seen that like power grids have gone out because of cyber attacks?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Oh, yeah. I'm just behind, I guess. In my
this has happened on a couple of occasions in the Ukraine, and I believe in it. Both of these attacks, I believe it was 2015 and 2016, right before Christmas. The first attack was pretty notorious. There were actually some 0 days that were leveraged there. They oh my gosh, where to begin on that one? There was a cyber break-in, if that's the way we'd like to describe it, that occurred at a Ukrainian transmission management organization. I wish I had read up on this a little bit more prior. So
sorry.
So the cyber warrior, the hacker, however we want to call him, broke in and was opening and closing the breakers for the power system. Like these are huge transformers that they were opening and closing. Now, I don't like it. I don't like it when my kids flip the lights on and off. Like that's going to break something. Imagine doing that when you had millions of volts.
Well, you always see it in the movies, but then you think, oh, it's the movie. It's like that can't like really happen.
Welcome to the 21st century.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jay, but it makes me think about how do we, like in our world, you have vulnerabilities that get reported by external researchers and we mitigate them and we disclose them. How does that dynamic work in the ICS world?
Right. So is it known vulnerabilities? Is it open source? Is it vendors stuff? Like, where is it?
So
Katie's getting really excited.
It was a mixture.
Oh boy.
In this particular attack, it was a mixture of vulnerabilities. They were just poorly defended systems. And my general attitude for industrial control systems is you should really be building a secure architecture around these devices. They're like children. You put gates around children, you lock doors when there's children around. You don't want them to
keep
just
mine locked in a cage.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because if you turn your back on them for 1 second, they're out the front door, they're down the street, playing with strangers without a second thought. So you have to build this secure architecture around them to protect them from their own foolishness. They just don't know any better. But these children are critical to our lives. Like we don't want to risk anything ever happening to them. So if we keep that in mind and have this little secure firewall, maybe 4 firewalls around them, I think is what CISA suggests.
Don't connect them to the internet.
Yeah.
They're protected by a firewall, though.
No.
4 firewalls.
4 firewalls.
I'm just laughing. I'm laughing because I always heard that excuse in a past job. Like, well, this isn't that serious. We're protected by a firewall.
Yeah.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's famous last words. But
seriously, okay, good. I'm happy you support me on that.
So having as many controls in place around a device prior to finding out that there was something that was wrong with it is a huge advantage you can have over the adversary. And if we can, get a leg up and keep them off the network, keep them away from the devices, then who cares if we're only patching every 5 years?
But yeah, so we talk about like an adversary, but it sounds like we're talking about like nation state level kind of things. And like maybe some of the attacks we talked about before with the power grid were nation state level. But there's other instances about like ransomware or cyber criminals. Or my favorite example is, do you remember that wind farm that they were doing crypto mining? Yeah. Oh yeah. So there was a wind farm that somebody had gotten into, and they were doing crypto mining using the wind farm to do it. And like, it's a really cool story. It's like all public. You can go Google it. But that's not like a nation state. That's just like a guy being opportunist, right? So you have to be careful of these things.
That was, I believe, Robert Lee, who is a thought leader among others in the ICS realm, and he said in that story, once the asset owner found out there was someone on their network managing the device for, they said they didn't care because maybe the system was running inefficiently, but they were patching.
Like Katie's like silently laughing. Do you get
Because
her?
I know what I was there. I know what happened. It's so good. I can't contain my joy. Go on, Jay.
She's laughing without laughing. It's amazing. I don't know how you do that.
So at the cost of crypto mining, they had a stranger that was managing their network for free.
Yep. And they did a risk-based decision and decided that when it came down to like removing this bad actor, what we would call a bad actor, from their networks, that they would rather keep them there because they were running their network so well.
Wow.
It was so well patched and like
turned into a homeostatic relationship.
Mutually beneficial relationship.
That's it. That's what
Yeah. So okay, tell us about the traffic lights, because I want to hear about the traffic lights.
Oh, oh my God, I love traffic lights. What? Tell me.
Right.
I want to hear it.
Colors.
I'm so excited. You
neutral
see, I'm like
traffic light
leaning
camp.
in. I'm like, please tell me about traffic lights. Can I hack them to like make them like go when I want them to go, like the ambulance?
It's possible, depending on where you live, how your traffic's managed, and
how much time you want to spend in jail.
Yes.
But I'm wondering, it's like, what if I'm in like a real emergency? Can I claim it and try to like change that?
No, and you will go to jail. Don't do this.
So this is definitely a felony now. And
reaction.
Prove that I was in a real emergency, and that's why I had to hack them.
Call 911. If you're in a real emergency, don't mess with the traffic lights.
Just saying.
You're an emergency, pull over.
I'm making it fun tonight, you know.
Yes,
Jay,
you are.
Jay, tell us how you should not hack them, or why you can hack them, or never could hack them.
So this was a story that I read before I even had a clue what an industrial control system was. This is like early turn of the century technology here. There was at the time, you could use infrared transmitters to change the light. I think they're called MERTs, mobile infrared transmitter. And in some areas, you can still see these devices sitting above the traffic system. I don't think they changed the lights anymore. So a guy had figured out that if he got one of these devices off of eBay for a few $100, he could shave 20 minutes off of his commute in the morning.
Why not? I want that.
So for a year, the traffic management.
I'm just saying, some people cheat the HOA lanes. We learned that the other day, and they pick up people just to be able to go in the HOA lanes.
Is that a felony?
No, that's a program. That's a mass transit program in Washington, D.C.
The program.
Why do you feel it's
isn't
okay
it
to
HOV, by the way?
Oh, HOV, not HOA. I'm so used to HOA. I'm sorry. I live in Cary, North Carolina. Everything's an HOA, not an
really
HOV.
aggressive HOA.
Yeah, HOV. Sorry. Thanks, Josh.
All right. So people decided that he could shave off 20 minutes.
Right. And so he's essentially attacking an industrial control system at level 0. The sensor is operating as intended. It is receiving a valid signal, and it's turning the light green. It's turning the next light green, the next light green, the next light green, and it kills the timing for all of the traffic for a year.
A whole year? That's a lot of time to disrupt something like that. Yeah. Where a lot of people spend a lot of money and time to figure out the right system.
Absolutely. So over time.
Why did it take them so long to figure it out?
No one thought anybody could do that.
How about one question at a time, Lisa?
I'm sorry. I'm so excited about this. It's like a whole other world that I'm not used to. That I'm like, oh, I want to hear more. Yay!
It's hilarious. Before we started recording, Lisa's like, "I'm going to be quiet. I don't know anything about this."
I have questions. That's why I want to learn. I want to soak it all in.
So you imagine this wave of weirdness propagating across town, and then it's fine for the rest of the day. But they over time, they notice through the behavior of the traffic system, like something's wrong here. So they have their traffic cameras, which as you may know, like maybe in New Jersey, I think that's how they monitor traffic, is with the cameras. That's a Chris Christie joke, sorry. So over time, they went to their traffic cameras to see what's going on. And oddly enough, every day when the timing went awry, there was a white pickup truck.
No way.
Intersection. Every day. And finally, they kind of realized that there's something very special about this truck. The guy finally got pulled over, completely copped to it, paid. At that time, it wasn't a felony. So he kind of paid the ticket and was like, it was definitely worth it to get to work quickly and efficiently for a year. But that's a legitimate cyber attack impacting the physical realm, and it's happening at level 0. It's extremely difficult to.
Did he have any talent? Like, I mean, obviously he had some talent, but was it his world, or? I
couldn't find the article for this conversation. I
know I put you on the spot.
There's a lot of different versions of this story out there. This wasn't just one guy that bought something off of eBay one time. There are legitimate uses for these devices. I never even thought about it. Obviously, first responders, ambulance, police car, all of that, but also mass transit. The buses would get an extra second or two to get through the intersection because their mass transit, their mileage is more efficient when they're moving. So give them a couple seconds at the light. And it was something I'd never considered at all for delaying a red light. But that's just one of those.
Go ahead, Jay. Sorry, let me finish your thought there.
No, it's just one of those really simple attacks, because you think about it, an infrared transmitter, that's a TV remote.
Oh, I do that. And it's like in the remotes, because I have my stuff in the closet and not where my TV is. And so I goes through and then goes to the closet with my stuff there, and it's like great.
And we should say like that, this instance, the traffic lights is not what we would call a cybersecurity vulnerability, because the device is acting in a way that was designed and intended to act, right? This is kind of like a life hack versus a cybersecurity vulnerability. There's another really cool story about very similar, where there were FedEx drivers driving around like Newark Airport in like New Jersey, and they wanted to like take a nap. And so they have these GPS. They were in the beginning of like GPS. This was probably like, I don't know, 2010-ish. They were being tracked by like the companies, these delivery drivers. And so their tracking system was a GPS transmitter. And so they bought GPS jammers so they could jam the GPS signal so that they could like take a nap on duty, right? And they could just like go wherever they wanted, go visit friends, go do whatever. But their route was all around Newark Airport. And they were jamming the GPS in the tower. Right. And so you have like, yeah. It's called purposeful interference. And there is a actual working group within the US government called the PERT, the Purposeful Interference Response Team.
I always maybe I watch too many movies, but I'm always worried about that time where like your internet doesn't work, your phones don't work, you're like nothing works, it's electronic in your house, and like maybe you got like someone zoned on you to like bomb your whole like network system. I've watched too many movies, right?
So
Probably.
it's a lot of fun. Those GPS jammers. I was extremely tempted to buy one back in the.
They are illegal. They are illegal. Go on.
Oh,
Not
yeah, you
only
can't
are
now,
they
Jay.
illegal, but when they made them illegal, they sent federal agents around to homes with customer lists and said, "Hey, do you have this device?" And it was a yes or no question. And if you said yes, they said, "I'll take it." And if you said no, they came in and found it for you.
Because they have the authority to
interesting.
do that as export
So I
control.
sort of
They
like
can
it.
seize devices like that, and so it is a felony. Do not do it.
Oh, Crow, you have a question. Go ahead.
I wanted to build on Lisa's fascination with movies, and I was curious, what do dinosaurs have in common with?
I was ready for you to come with this. Okay, I'm happy you're bringing it up, Crow. It's great.
So everyone's favorite ICS hack movie since I think Die Hard 2 is probably Jurassic Park. And
I need to fill in the gaps here because I don't know any of this. So like
Jurassic
pretend I'm
Park?
like the
It's a movie with
book
dinosaurs.
with the dummies and I need to read it. Start up from scratch.
But you have
the
boys,
plots of
right?
Jurassic
You're
Park.
familiar with the concept of dinosaurs.
Little. Like I know I have boys, but they're not big dinosaur freaks.
So
It was like the biggest movie of 1993.
Okay, I know the movie. It was a little scary for my kids. So start me from scratch. Like
So a
beginning.
key
Go from the
element
beginning.
of the
Jay.
movie is there are these dinosaurs at this tourist destination that are in cages, and their lone IT guy needs a distraction to exfil some
Newman.
dinosaur embryos. Newman. And so he disables all of the fences, the locks, and everything in the park, and lets out all the dinosaurs while he tries to escape as a distraction, right? And a lot of people like to say this is an ICS hack, and I'm like, from my perspective, it wasn't a hack against ICS. The industrial control systems are the dinosaurs. They are the product. They are manufacturing this experience for the tourists. He disabled the safety systems that controlled these processes that are making the park money, right? So once he disabled these safety systems, the processes didn't immediately go, the safety systems are disabled, and break out. It took the dinosaurs a little bit to figure things out. And they then, burst onto the scene, and, that was the rest of the movie there. And I find there's a lot of parallels to the, I'm about to go down a rabbit hole here that you guys may not be aware of, but the petrochemical attack that happened in the Middle East with the safety system there was infected with malware, highly customized malware that was designed to take the safety system out of play. So, and where this diverges from the Jurassic Park story a little bit is this malware, once it took the safety system out of play, someone had to come back and then force the control system to start operating out of bounds. And this chemical plant, once that started to happen, if that would have happened, it did not happen. The adversary made a mistake and were caught. But if that would have happened, you could have seen a physical consequence. I mean, a physical consequence of life and death. And these safety systems, you think of these they're like the governor on an engine that keep it from going too fast or too slow. But once they're taken out of play, the system is left to its own devices. And the safety system, an SIS system, safety instrumentation system, its sole purpose is once a control system goes out of bounds, is it closes out the system in a safe and controlled manner. Think about a controlled shutdown of a plant. or even a data center. That doesn't just happen.
A lot of these companies have that, like that big red lever to stop or the button to stop?
So that's the good news about this type of attack. This is a highly customized attack, and you cannot just go and there is no easy button for the SIS attack. So there is no universal safety system that's going to be in every single facility. They're customized, they're developed, and unique to where they're deployed, because everyone's control processes are different, just based on intellectual property. No one makes gasoline the exact same way, but everyone says that their way is the best. And I'm sure they have safety systems to make sure that their way is the best, right?
Which makes it very good and bad, because you have these customizable systems. And so if you don't have a solid set of system engineering folks who can monitor and control and provide updates to those systems, then you can have pretty bad consequences. So each one is different and highly customized, and that's good, but it can also be bad.
But it makes me think, all the things we talked about, though, there's cybersecurity vulnerabilities, which we typically deal with. But a lot of the things that you're talking about might not have been cybersecurity vulnerabilities, but they fall into the realm of safety issues, right? Where there could be a safety impact, because while a device is working as designed, it's not secured in a fashion that would prevent somebody from misusing it, right?
It violates the security policy. There's no maybe integrity checking.
Are those cataloged in some way? Like cybersecurity vulnerabilities are CVEs, right? But
ICS has CVEs as well. So there's a whole organization called ICS CERT, and they are what's called the root CNA, so CVE naming authority for industrial control systems. And they have several vendor CNAs, CVE naming authorities, that fall underneath them. And they can issue CVEs on behalf of a vendor who may not be a CNA. So ICS CERT is a government organization, falls under Department of Homeland Security, and they are responsible for assisting to facilitate the disclosure of industrial control system related vulnerabilities. There's a lot of different things they do, like malware and assessments and other things, but they have a whole team out in Idaho that does nothing but handle vulnerabilities that are disclosed to them by the research community. So same way that we do on the IT side, the ICS side does. So like, to give you an idea, in 2017, there were about 800 ICS CVEs issued.
Does Art's brother work there, except he has a mohawk and a handlebar mustache?
We always love bringing art into our conversation. So Jay, I think that we started off the conversation hinting that we were talking about this conversation for a certain, situation. But I mean, obviously with the ransomware and all the stuff that's going on lately, we saw that it was the hospital that had to reroute a person because of a situation, and then she passed away. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's a common thing? Do you think it's I'm sorry, I don't want to, sorry, Crob, I'm making that make you laugh. I'm not trying to make you laugh because it's not funny at all. But I'm like, do you think that we can stop this? Are we in control? Or are we not in control? And what do we need to do to be able to be in control? And I'm sorry if that was a really hard.
Who is we question in this situation?
Well, maybe it's all of us. Because maybe my technology is at that hospital.
Right.
I'm sure yours are too. So what do we do?
So the idea of treatment delayed is treatment denied kind of comes to mind when we're talking about this. And I had a family member that worked in a dentist's office. It kind of has a little bit of a parallel there. She worked in a dentist's office, and she was a little bit older than some of the other folks in the dentist's office. And the internet went out. And all of the younger folks said, "We got to close for the day. We've lost the internet." And she's like, "We still have paper we can write on, right? And they're like, yeah. I was like, oh, then we can still accept patients. We just have to write things down. Oh.
And remember the history.
Yeah, but that's a case where like a dentist office doesn't have as high stakes. So like I will tell you, like I worked in an incident when I worked for the government where I did undersea communication systems, and we're talking about terrestrial and fiber optics communications. And we had an instance in a hospital in Texas that had to shut down and divert patients. This was back in like 2015, 2012, where they had to shut down and divert patients because they had a fully automated pharmacy. And because the pharmacy could not do patient quality checks against the patient's medical records to make sure there was no conflicting medication,
and
you
somehow
couldn't
the patient can't know what they're doing on their own.
No, it's not about that. It's about surgery. It's about surgeries. And so surgeons couldn't operate because anesthesia couldn't be given because that's controlled by the pharmacy. And the pharmacy has a requirement to compare that against the patient's records. And those records were automated and held in an off-site server farm in another country because the hospital, when they purchased that server space, they didn't purchase it in a specific place. They purchased a service, and the service was distributed. So part of the patient records was in one place and part of the patient records was in another. And when that cable went down, when that fiber optic transmission method went down, that hospital had to shut down. And that's happened. Like, so the fact that the person just died on this is sad, but also not unprecedented.
So that comes back to a failure of contingency planning, right? We've become too reliant on this cybersecurity or this electronic health record, and so when that electronic health record fails, what do? We don't know. We have to stop everything. So what's interesting to reference back an earlier discussion, the initial Ukraine attack that happened when the power went out, the reason they were able to restore power so quickly is because they still had a lot of old style analog systems in place. So they just picked up hand radios and told guys to get in trucks and go out to stations and flip switches. So they had that contingency in place. They didn't trust their computers that were managed by their own people enough to have them 100%, E-enabled. I guess that's a new term now. So they were able to restore.
What does the E-enabled mean? Like, I'm sorry.
Electronically enabled.
Okay, thank you. Just
like internet enabled, that kind of that concept.
Okay,
we're seeing that more in the aviation sector, but so they were able to just use old-fashioned walkie-talkies to restore service, despite a very advanced, persistent threat that took down their network and made it difficult to restore service. They just truck, switch, boom, lights were back on.
So I'm sorry, go finish, Jay. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. No, go ahead.
And I think hospitals are very capable of achieving that. They've just kind of lost sight of that. They've lost sight of that in the convenience of the modern electronic world.
Yeah, it's interesting because at one time in my career, I worked on basically providing the platform that a clinical information system sat on. So it mainly went into ICUs and surgical units and ERs, and we had to take into consideration. So we put the hardware, the computing solution that went behind the software, and we had to take into consideration things like that. We had redundancies, we had distributed environments, we had geographically dispersed databases that synced up constantly. And then we actually used to consult not just with the hospitals on physical security, but also with our development teams and our validation teams on how to ensure they were developing a product that would be less likely to be hacked or to be abused, right? Not impervious to it, but and this was back in the 90s. People were, these kinds of systems were relatively new. People were still using, paper and pencil to keep track of notes. And I think about something that was said about how we have there's always a risk of something being hacked and the wrong dosages of medication or the wrong medication being given to a patient. And I remember having conversations with some of the validation team who thought that wasn't a big deal. And I would would wave over one of the nurses that used to be an ER nurse, and she would, just drill into them how critical that was, and that we needed safeguards in place. And I think this is what's kind of interesting about this topic is, while there are different modalities in our industry that focus on the physical versus the cybersecurity versus ICS and other types of devices, we all really come together at one point or another.
Always. We always come together.
Yeah. This is
like, when have we not? Like, seriously.
Yeah. No, you're right. But I think a lot of people, especially, recently I've been hearing people that have forgotten the fact that security is layered, that we need to work together, that there is a partnership.
Like an onion?
Yeah.
Peel the onion. Where are you going down to? What's the core? Maybe it's an upgrade system.
That's right.
The core, Crow.
Go on, Josh. What were you saying?
So anyway, point being that I think that there is this continuous need for this kind of conversation to be had across the different areas of cybersecurity, and for us to be open to the fact that people are looking at security from different angles and taking that into consideration, rather than, being myopic in our assessment of what is secure and what isn't, right? So anyway, with that, we've kind of gone on. Thank you very much for taking the time, Jay. I appreciate it. I appreciate everybody listening to us on this episode of the Security Unhappy Hour. And
it's been my pleasure.
Again soon. Yeah. Thank you
Jay,
all.
awesome.
I'm thoroughly scared.
It's a whole new world that I'm not used to talking about, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Oh.